The announcement of Diablo 2 Resurrected in 2021 brought a lot of attention back onto the small speedrunning community that had formed over the last half-decade. But while some embraced the opportunity to become the face of Diablo 2 or to join teams behind dedicated fan sites, the top runners of the time eschewed the allure of content creation, remaining committed to their own pursuits of excellence. Nonetheless, the minor celebrity afforded to several members of the International was a large target, and given that they'd been off the top of the single-player leaderboards for a long time, it seemed obvious that the current top-class runners were due to take their shot. But despite its age, the record was nothing to sneeze at, and it would take more than mechanical skill to get to the top of this leaderboard. So join me as we close out the final part of this series covering the history of 8-player records, covering the vast experimentation and theory crafting that the Second International would use to push times lower than even they thought possible. Since the early days of the First International, a sweep of new runners had come onto the scene and come to dominate the single-player leaderboard. Indrek had come back and taken over the Sorceress categories. The Australian runner Kano had migrated from League and Osu onto dominating the Druid class. Boxer Kabaddi had a habit of dropping new records out of the blue on YouTube and shaking up the scene, and Macalb had come on first in the Amazon leaderboards, then prominently commanding the Barbarian class. Together, they smashed the old boundaries and embraced the shift to grinding out records that had worn out some of the founders of the D2 speedrun scene. But the biggest disruption had come from an enigmatic source who never played with a camera and only hosted his content on Twitch despite having no financial incentive to do so. Based out of the mind-bending peaks of Switzerland, Bender Meets Fry would take things to the limit, constantly exploring new strategies on classes and taking what had once been niche exploits, like swapcasting, and making them integral to record runs. One glimpse at the overall leaderboards for Diablo 2 speedruns was enough to show the level of skill and determination behind the otherwise plain timer and stats interface he used as his streaming layout. The remaster was enough of an inspiration for the new crew to branch out from their home of single-player speedruns. In the very month D2R was announced, a conspiracy was formed to shake up the leaderboards on Resurrector's launch and show what was really possible when the top of the crop took their shot. While many in the past had speculated about bringing the Necromancer into an 8-player run for safety as well as lower resist, they'd all dismissed it out of hand when weighing up the low DPS and the fact that you can just buy wands with lower resist charges later on in the game. But Bender was out to show that it could be done. With a build that was startlingly similar to one that he would later use to dominate the Necromancer hell run in Resurrected, Bender saw a way of synergizing with the Paladin to boost his early game utility. This would be a huge improvement on a slot that had otherwise been a fairly passive character throughout the runs, mostly just there to provide auras for safety in the early game and boost others' damage in the late game. But bringing in a Necromancer required removing another character. The Sorceress seemed the most obvious choice given there were 3 to choose from, but by removing a vital source of static which can rapidly reduce enemy mobs to 1 HP, the 3-team strategy which had been the foundation of the run since the Jursok project 10 years earlier would no longer hold together. To overcome this, Bender came up with a genius plan, nicknamed The Harvest. Keeping the core of a separate team on tower runs for runes, he completely transformed the playstyle for the rest of the group. Instead of splitting into groups to kill mobs while progressing through maps, now there'd be dedicated progression roles while everyone else was on scouting duty. Splitting off to various areas, the players would find a boss pack or two, herd them together before opening a town portal and heading back to town. Once enough packs had been found, the team's shot caller would get everyone back in town, and as a group they'd work through the town portals systematically one at a time. Get in, kill, get out, next TP. The aim was to hit these groups fast, so they were ready to leave and start the next game right as the tower team got to the Countess, then generally continue with this strategy all the way through to hell. This would ensure there was always a source of static available to rip through boss packs, although there'd be a minor trade-off with experience per monster killed. And of course, by having dedicated progression rolls, he was able to replace the second assassin with another druid for extra damage through the druid's OP Fissure ability. Based on the outlook of Resurrected, as well as the general will to play such an intense strategy, there was a lot of rotation of team members. In all, it took 6 months before the team actually got a practice off the ground on the 18th of September, just a week before the release of D2R. While Bender was initially happy with the small group they'd formed, the need for a bench soon became apparent when it came time to play. He'd filled out his roster with the pioneer hell hardcore legend Ryu Quetzalcoatl, but Ryu wasn't interested in Resurrected and would only be available to play for the first couple of practices. Uga, the guy who taught Nightfall a thing or two in the early days of speedrunning, was another early recruit and dropout. And so, after much searching, they filled out the bench with a few new names, as well as locking in the French Maestro Sanzo as a regular. They even brought Jim into the chat. Sadly, no evidence of their first run exists anymore beyond the basic strategy and chats in the Discord. Still, trust me on this, it was a solid run. Clocking in around 2 hours 40 minutes, even without using the telesort glitch strategy, it was a hell of an achievement for a first run. With a little more practice, they got the time down to 2 hours 25 minutes, and then jumped across to Resurrected and found it awful.
I can't imagine doing 8-man in D2R. I mean, we tried to do a 2-man in D2R and that was unplayable already, so I don't see 8-man happening anytime soon.
On the plus side, this removed a lot of ambiguities on the team's purpose and plans. They'd focus solely on the Lord of Destruction record, and wouldn't be distracted by supposed glitch fixes that'd never eventuate. It also opened the door for wider recruiting since they no longer had to bank on players shelling out for a new computer and new game in order to join the runs. And with this, they bagged a great resource. The very same core who'd played with the German team, then Jim's team over all these years. But before they got back up and running, some changes in the strategy were needed. Despite the rapid progress they'd made using the new strategy, on reflection, Bender wasn't satisfied with the performance of the Necromancer. The ability to attract huge hordes of monsters in Nightmare and Hell wasn't as critical as he thought, as other characters could do similar just fine. On their next runs, they'd embrace the telesort glitch as well as ditch the Necro in favour of another assassin, while also adding in some more cow runs to help Indrek out and replace Hell Act 1 and 2 leveling with Nightmare Bale runs, as both the DE team and First International had done. All these changes to the strategy helped, but it was still lacking in the later difficulties. An underlying problem existed that Bender had been aware of from the start but thought could be worked around: next hit delay. As explained in the history of Kill Bale world records, skills such as the assassin's Wake of Fire have an inbuilt next hit delay which precludes enemies from taking further damage from skills of this type for a set duration. For example, if a monster was hit by Wake of Fire, it would have a set period of immunity where it couldn't be hit by Tornado or Fissure for a fraction of a second. The impact on kill speed was so small as to be almost unnoticeable during actual gameplay, but it added up. After a 218 with the two assassins, they managed to whittle it down to 217, still unsatisfied with the overall composition, believing that the 3 Sork strategy could outdo them. But Bender still had another trick up his sleeve, one that seemed to be staring everyone in the face, but that no one had believed in. Add in a Hamadin. The idea of adding another Paladin had come up several times in the course of the history, but had mostly been focused on adding in safety for the team to minimise deaths, rather than to improve the overall damage output of the team. Of course, with the Paladin's weak early game, it never really fit into the 3-team strategy where early DPS was so critical. But the Harvest team did away with such concerns, since there were only really 2 teams now, Progression and Harvest. Static would always be available, and that'd easily mitigate the Paladin's lack of DPS. The real advantage would come in the mid to late game, where by adding in the DPS from the new Paladin, you'd also enable the existing Paladin to up his damage output, upgrading him from being a simple aura bot to instead being another huge source of damage. The team was skeptical, but willing to give it a shot on the next run. There was just one problem. Their Paladin player was asleep. After scrambling for their other alternate Paladin, Lucky Luciano who'd helped him out on the 218 run, Indrek took a chance and reached out to someone who just submitted their first speedrun to the resurrected leaderboards. Me. After a couple of rough starts, the run got up and going pretty well, and what was supposed to be a practice just through the first couple of acts of normal ended up being a full-blown run.
BK, how is your time looking? How long can you stay still?
I can stay as long as you need, as long as this run goes.
That's brave.
Despite a few teething issues, once the hammers started flying, they immediately proved their worth. And with Indrek fully in the groove of low-level teleporting after just a few practices, things were looking amazing. On literally the first try of the dual Paladin setup, even with a completely new player and some rough gameplay, the team achieved a personal best of 2 hours, 11 minutes and 17 seconds, the second fastest run ever completed on official Battle.net servers, and all without any spirit for the Telesork. It was clear that Paladin strat was going to take them to the record. A week later they were back at it, and this time Jim didn't sleep in. The team were in high spirits at the start of the run, and despite a couple of minor slip-ups, the harvest strategy seemed to be keeping pace, even if it didn't always feel like it.
Is there any XP?
But it was when Indrek hit level 18 that things really started flying.
Next to him. Come keep in.
I need it.
Fast.
Not fast.
They got one amulet, this one summoner.
Okay, go boxer.
Grid.
Go boxer to him.
Yeah, TP.
Why am I not dead? What is this right now? What's going on?
Just copy the entrance again. You know, a boxer.
This early experience was insanely good, and with Indrek being one of the few players to ever take on the Players 8 hardcore single player runs, his skills had been honed perfectly for exactly these kinds of situations. Managing to level himself without any help from the support assassin meant Bender could get some of that amazing Tombs experience and also get a head start on the Flayer dungeon while Indrek teleported ahead. The team's coordination was at the top of its game, and as they blitzed through the acts, it was gold split after gold split. When Bale died at the end of normal, they were almost 5 minutes ahead of the world record, and 2 minutes faster than had been seen in any of the records up to this point. Knowing that their blitz strategy was very unreliable in generating a spirit sword, Bender had put some thought into getting the Telesork a 20 FCR wand as quickly as possible, and landed on another novel innovation, Imbue Wands at Chassis. This also had the benefit of potentially rolling some other very useful properties like increased resistances, life or mana, which, while not holding a candle to how OP Spirit is, would still be a massive help in the later difficulties. With Indrek up to the job, Core even had a call back to the old German 8-player days.
See if you can get the imbue hammer on the way, Hendrik, this time.
Yes.
Okay, get hammer. I was told we get hammer. There's the hammer.
Not that it really paid off, but it was still nice to see a harkening back to MFB's old habits. All the while, the team's strategy had again converged closer to the old strats, with normal Bale runs going while Indrek was left to progression through Nightmare. But even so, where Llama and Teo would previously hesitate in making sure others joined the game to smash the altar in the Claw Viper Temple, Indrek didn't give a damn. He was in and out so fast he didn't even have time to comment on the best boss pack in Diablo 2. With the team coming together again in the jungle of Act 3, it was back to the harvest strategy as Indrek taxied the team through the act, dropping portals at every boss pack he could find, and again got the rest of the team to handle the quest items while he zoomed ahead, getting gold splits in Acts 3 and 4 and finishing up Nightmare 6 minutes ahead of the record. Somehow, the insane pace kept up throughout Hell, and just as they were about to spawn Duriel, Indrek was stopped in his tracks.
Right.
How the fuck am I gonna do that?
It's okay.
And that's why you always bring a barb.
This is bad.
If you died, we come.
Can you?
The only risk is if we're leaving for spawn is.
I think we should just go and help.
Yeah,
I think we should
yeah,
go.
Still, we can
No, we got it.
Wait, do not join.
Oh, okay.
Not yet. We just got it.
Then one, yeah?
Macau, were you able to get out with a TP copied on thingy?
Okay,
Can you go in Macau or do I go?
You. I'm keeping them.
Oh yeah, right.
I don't know if I can get out though.
Okay, done.
With more gold splits in Hell Act 3 and 4, helped by massive damage from the Paladins, it was back to that same problem that had plagued 8-player runs up to this point. The team knew Indrek would get them where they needed to be, but would the boosted DPS help them farm experience fast enough to keep up? In the end, it was barely even a question. Somehow they'd hit level 60 in just an hour and 50 minutes. The record was in the bag, it was just a matter of how low they could go.
It's up. Party.
All right, and you join. Party up as well. Quickly party.
Oh.
Everyone has to party. Yep.
Let's go. Go.
Dude.
Everybody in Act 5.
Yeah, Act 5.
Why is core level 68?
GG.
GG, guys, man.
Nice.
Let's go.
Let's go. Sub 2.
First sub 2
Whoa.
Hellbale
Yeah.
ever.
The 2-hour mark hadn't just been beaten, it had been destroyed. The dual Paladin strat was a game changer and showed the power of combining creative thinking, deep analysis, and phenomenal skill. After taking more than 6 months to even get a run off the ground, it had taken less than a month for the team to push the boundaries, hitting what was considered insane by members of their own team literally the day before. And that's where things stand right now. As if to prove the run wasn't a fluke, the team did another the following week and got a 158. But shortly after, events transpired which would distract several of the key members of the team, and the momentum behind the runs quickly died off. While there was some speculation on setting the bar on the long-requested hardcore 8-player speedrun, it seems this is off the cards for the near future, and who knows what it'll take to see such a coming together of supreme talent again. Fostered by Gymnasium's enthusiasm, as well as some much-needed server stability improvements, multiplayer runs have started getting a foothold in the Diablo 2 Resurrected community, and many teams have adopted the 2 Paladin Harvest strategy. But even the first International aren't coming close to the old LOD records just yet, and it remains an open question of just how much of the gap is in load times, and how much is it that successfully pulling off the Harvest requires the kind of talent that gets you to the top of the single-player leaderboards. Since its launch over 20 years ago, the Diablo series is renowned for its online play, and every ladder reset there are always groups coming together trying to smash through to the endgame grind as fast as possible. But key to an effective speedrun had always been having a consistent team come together to practice on a consistent schedule. After the earliest days on the SDA boards where runs would die not even halfway through Act 1, somehow MFB, Carter and Lav along with the guys at indiablo.de managed to pull this off for a brief few months. Then years later, Lav, Jim and Sully would do the same in the first International, against even tougher odds scheduling across the Atlantic. And finally, Bender, Kano and Indrek would somehow take it to the logical conclusion, coordinating players across the Australasian, American and European time zones, and still managed to smash records that had stood for years. Being great alone is a feat. Being great together is a masterpiece. And with that,
my work here is finished.